It was with great pride that I set out to document the campaign against the rising Skaven menace, traveling alongside one of the finest Imperial armies ever mustered. The very sight of the Empire's might filled me with an overwhelming sense of confidence. Columns of gleaming cavalry, infantry in polished armor, and towering war machines all moving with precision and discipline. The clang of steel on steel, the boom of cannons, and the rhythm of marching boots seemed to echo the Empire's invincibility. I had heard stories, of course, whispers of the Skaven lurking in the dark, twisted tunnels beneath the earth, their schemes forever nibbling at the edges of the Empire's lands. But like many of my colleagues, I considered them little more than overgrown vermin, capable of causing trouble. Yes, but no match for the disciplined forces of Sigmar's empire. The soldiers I spoke to were brimming with confidence as well. Captain Reinhardt, an experienced veteran of many campaigns, shared my sentiments. He described the Skaven as a cowardly and disorganized rabble, prone to fleeing the moment they faced the Empire's steel. We marched toward the mountains in the south, where Skaven incursions had been reported. The journey was uneventful, and the air was thick with anticipation of an easy victory. It wasn't long before we encountered the first wave of Skaven. The battle was swift, brutal, and shockingly one-sided. Imperial cannons roared, tearing through the disorganized ranks of ratmen with devastating precision. The cavalry charged, their lances glittering in the sun as they cut swaths through the Skaven lines, scattering the creatures like leaves in the wind. I watched from a nearby hill, marveling at the strength of the Empire's war machine. The Skaven seemed no match for the disciplined formations and overwhelming firepower of the Empire. From my vantage point, it looked like the victory was assured, a mere formality to clear away the infestation before moving on to more significant matters. But just as the battle appeared to be drawing to a close, something shifted. Among the fleeing Skaven, a figure caught my eye, a hulking, metallic figure that seemed out of place amid the chaos of the battlefield. I focused my spyglass on it and felt a chill crawl down my spine. The creature was massive, covered in crude, heavy armor, its body bristling with wires and mechanical contraptions that sparked with green energy. It carried a staff that crackled with an eerie glow, the head of it radiating pulses of warp energy that shimmered in the midday sun. This was no mere Skaven soldier. This was something else entirely. Before I could get a better look, the creature disappeared into the smoke of battle, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. I mentioned this strange figure to Captain Reinhardt afterward, but he dismissed it with a wave of his hand. Skaven warlocks, he said, nothing to worry about. Their magic is as unpredictable as the wind, dangerous, yes, but nothing that our cannons can't handle. And yet, I could not shake the image of that towering, armored figure from my mind. The way it moved through the battlefield, commanding an unnatural presence, it was more than just a warlock. I felt a sense of unease creeping into the edges of my confidence, a nagging thought that the Skaven were perhaps more than they appeared. The battle ended in resounding victory, and the men celebrated well into the night. The Empire's might had triumphed again, and I found myself recording the events with great satisfaction. But even as I wrote, the image of that creature haunted me. I began to wonder if perhaps I had seen the real threat that day, something far more dangerous than the Skaven horde we had just crushed. It would not be long before that unease turned to dread, as the next phase of the campaign revealed the true horrors lurking beneath the earth. The mood of the camp was jubilant after the first victory, but as I write now, I wonder how we could have been so blind to what lay ahead. The battle had been won, yes, but it had only been a skirmish. A prelude. I had seen it, that strange figure disappearing into the chaos, but my warnings had fallen on deaf ears. The soldiers were confident, too confident, in their belief that they could crush the Skaven as easily as they had before. We advanced deeper into the mountains, following the fleeing remnants of the Skaven horde. Our scouts reported strange movements ahead, small groups of ratmen scurrying through the ravines and passes, but nothing to suggest a coordinated force. Captain Reinhardt, ever the optimist, seemed eager to bring another quick end to the Skaven threat. His men were eager, too. I overheard them laughing and boasting about how they would chase the ratmen back to their filthy burrows. As the second battle approached, we found ourselves in a narrow valley hemmed in by steep cliffs. The terrain felt unnatural, jagged, sharp, as if the very earth had been twisted by some unseen hand. The air was heavy with a foul stench, a mix of decay and something acrid that burned at the back of the throat. It was then that I began to feel the first stirrings of doubt. The Skaven appeared on the ridge first, their small, hunched forms barely visible in the dim light of dawn. Reinhardt ordered his cannons to open fire, and the valley echoed with the thunderous roar of Imperial artillery. The first few blasts tore through the Skaven lines, sending their bodies tumbling down the cliffs in grotesque heaps. But then came the machines. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. There was movement in the Skaven ranks, something large, something mechanical. As the smoke cleared from the cannon fire, my heart froze. Rolling down the slopes were massive, twisted contraptions, doom wheels, I later learned they were called, spinning monstrosities of metal and warp energy, crackling with green lightning. They moved with an unnatural speed, careening across the battlefield, mowing down everything in their path. Our cannons fired again, but the shots went wide, the doom wheels moving too fast for the gunners to track. Before I could blink, one of the machines had torn through a regiment of halberdiers, reducing men to bloody pulp beneath its crushing wheels. So the air filled with the crackling of warp lightning, the acrid smell of burned flesh. I watched in horror as more Skaven machines appeared on the ridge, warp lightning cannons, their barrels glowing with a sickly green light, powered by what I could only assume was warpstone. Their blasts ripped through the Empire's lines, sending arcs of searing energy through armor, flesh and bone alike. Men screamed as they were incinerated where they stood, their bodies reduced to ashen moments. The once proud ranks of the Empire faltered. I could see it in their eyes, fear. So the soldiers who had marched with such confidence now looked lost, bewildered by the sheer violence of the Skaven's machines. The battlefield was chaos, the sounds of war replaced by the high-pitched whine of Skaven war machines and the anguished cries of the dying. I stood frozen, watching as the Empire's cavalry attempted a charge. The knights rode valiantly, their banners flying, their armor gleaming in the early morning light, but they were no match for the Skaven's monstrosities. A blast of warp light from one of the cannons ripped through their formation, sending horses and riders tumbling to the ground in smoking ruins. The smell of charred flesh filled the air. Amidst the carnage, I saw him again, Ikit Claw. He stood atop a rise, directing the machines with cold precision, his mechanical arm gesturing to his minions as they unleashed destruction. The staff he carried, the Storm Daemon, crackled with raw, untamed power, and with every wave of it, another blast of energy seared across the battlefield. But he wasn't just commanding the machines, he was one with them. The lines between flesh and metal had blurred in this creature, this abomination of science and magic. Reinhardt barked orders, desperately trying to rally his men, but it was clear that we were outmatched. The Skaven war machines were relentless, their violence unmatched by anything we had faced before. I watched as another doom wheel plowed through a regiment of swordsmen, its chaotic energy throwing bodies into the air like ragdolls. The Empire's cannons, once so mighty, now fired sporadically, the crew struggling to keep pace with the Skaven's unpredictable movements. What had been a carefully orchestrated defense had devolved into pure chaos. I saw men abandoning their posts, running from the field in terror. The confidence I had felt just a day before was gone, replaced by a creeping, insidious fear. The Skaven weren't just attacking, they were dismantling us piece by piece with their twisted creations. It became clear that we had no choice but to retreat. Reinhardt gave the order, and what remained of our forces began to pull back, scrambling over the rocky terrain as the Skaven's war machines pursued. I barely escaped with my life, the sound of warp lightning blasts ringing in my ears as I ran, my heart pounding in my chest. As we regrouped, far from the battlefield, I tried to make sense of what I had witnessed. The Empire, the mightiest force in the old world, had been brought low by creatures we had dismissed as vermin. And at the center of it all was Ikit Claw, a figure who had taken the chaotic potential of the Skaven and turned it into a terrifying force of technological brilliance. My hands trembled as I wrote these words. The Empire is strong, yes, but the Skaven Clan Skryre in particular possess something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Ikit Claw isn't just a leader, he's an architect of destruction, wielding powers that defy logic and reason. This is no mere war. This is something else, something worse. The scars of our last battle had not yet healed when we were called to fight again. But something had changed in the air. It was heavier now, thick with tension and dread, like the calm before a storm. The men who had once marched with such pride and confidence now shuffled nervously, their armor dulled by ash and blood. I could see it in their faces. They were beginning to realize that this campaign was not one of swift victories and parades. This was a descent into madness. Captain Reinhardt, normally so composed and commanding, seemed different as well. His voice, once full of certainty, now carried a tremor when he gave orders. He, too, had seen what I had seen, those infernal Skaven war machines, the twisted genius of Clan Skryre, and the brutal efficiency with which they had torn through our ranks. The next battle came sooner than expected. We had barely begun to regroup when the Skaven launched their attack. This time they came in force. Wave after wave of Skaven infantry poured out from the hills, their numbers so vast it seemed as though the earth itself was spewing them forth. They were led by hulking rat ogres, grotesque abominations of muscle and bone, their eyes burning with feral rage. But the worst was yet to come. As the battle unfolded, I found myself standing atop a ridge overlooking the battlefield, my view offering a full panorama of the carnage below. First, the Empire's forces held their ground, our cannons booming, our infantry forming ranks. But the Skaven, as always, had a dark secret lurking in the shadows, waiting to be unleashed. The first blast of warpfire came without warning. A bolt of sickly green energy shot across the field, striking the Empire's front line. I watched in horror as men, armored knights, disciplined halberdiers, were incinerated in an instant, their bodies reduced to smoldering ash. The warp fire spread like wildfire, its flames leaping from soldier, melting steel and flesh alike. The stench of burned flesh filled the air, mingling with the acrid tang of warpstone. From my vantage point, I could see the source of this unholy weapon. Skaven warlock-engineers, their twisted forms bristling with crude mechanical augmentations, directed their warp lightning cannons with cruel precision. These machines, fueled by the volatile power of warpstone, belched out arcs of green lightning that sliced through our ranks, leaving nothing but charred remains in their wake. The Imperial artillery, which had once been our pride, seemed pitiful in comparison. The cannons fired desperately, but their shots were sporadic and ineffective against the relentless advance of the Skaven war machines. The soldiers who had once stood tall and proud were now scattered, their formations crumbling under the weight of the Skaven's onslaught. I saw them then, the storm vermin, Clan Skryre white warriors clad in blackened armor and wielding cruel halberds. They moved with terrifying efficiency, cutting through our lines with a precision that belied their brutish forms. I had once dismissed the Skaven as disorganized rabble, but now I saw the terrifying reality they were anything but. Under Ikit Claw's command, they had become a finely tuned engine of destruction. And then I saw him again, Ikit Claw. Standing amidst the chaos, his presence was undeniable. His mechanical arm whirred and clicked as he directed his forces with ruthless precision. Storm Daemon, crackling with barely contained warp energy, seemed almost alive in his grasp, its power ready to be unleashed at any moment. The battle raged around him, but Ikit Claw moved with the calm of a conductor orchestrating a symphony of death. Every gesture of his clawed hand sent another bolt of warplight crashing into our ranks. His red, glowing eyes scanned the battlefield, and for a moment they locked onto me. I felt a chill run down my spine, as though the warlock-engineer could see straight into my soul. My momentary paralysis was broken by the sound of screaming. Below me, the Imperial lines were collapsing. Soldiers, once so brave, were now running in every direction, their faces twisted in terror. I could hear Captain Reinhardt barking orders, desperately trying to rally the men, but it was clear that the battle was lost. The Skaven had overwhelmed us, their war machines proving too powerful, too unpredictable, and too deadly. I barely had time to react before another wave of warpfire tore through the battlefield, igniting everything in its path. The green flames flickered and danced, their glow casting eerie shadows across the blood-soaked ground. The sight of men burning alive, their screams mingling with the crackling of warp energy, is something I will never forget. It was then that I realized we were not simply fighting a battle for territory or honor. This was something far worse. The Skaven, and particularly Clan Skryre, were not just fighting for conquest, they were fighting for annihilation. Ikit Claw, with his twisted machines and his insatiable thirst for destruction, was creating something beyond mere war. He was creating chaos, tearing at the very fabric of reality with his unnatural inventions. I knew I had to flee. There was no longer any hope of victory here. The empire, once so mighty, was crumbling before my eyes, and I could do nothing but watch. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest, the sound of warpfire and screams ringing in my ears. The battlefield stretched out behind me, a scene of pure carnage. The Imperial forces were in full retreat, those who could still run, anyway. The rest lay in broken heaps, consumed by the madness of war. As I write this, my hands tremble with the memory of what I witnessed. The Empire is strong, yes, but Ikit Claw, he is something else entirely. But his genius is a dark, twisted thing, a fusion of science and magic that defies all reason. The machines of Clan Skryre are more than weapons. They are expressions of madness, born from a mind that sees no boundary between creation and destruction. And I fear what will come next. The battles are becoming bloodier, more chaotic, and Ikit Claw grows bolder with each passing day. I had once believed that the Empire could triumph through sheer force of arms, but now I am not so sure. We are not fighting men. We are fighting something else, something far worse. The scraping sound of warpfire still echoes in my ears. I can scarcely believe how swiftly things have deteriorated. Each battle has been more desperate than the last, the chaos more overwhelming, and the bloodshed beyond anything I had ever imagined. The once proud army of the Empire, which had seemed so invincible, has now been reduced to a shadow of its former self. I have tried, in my writings, to maintain a certain scholarly distance, but now, as I record these thoughts, I feel that distance slipping away. Madness. It is the only word that comes to mind when I think of what I have seen. The Skaven know Clan Skryre do not fight like men. They do not adhere to any rules of war, to any sense of honor or strategy as we understand it. They revel in chaos, thrive in it, and their leader, Ikit Claw, embodies that madness. He is not simply a warlord. He is something far worse, a mind consumed by invention, willing to twist the very fabric of reality to suit his purposes. The last few days have been unsettling. Captain Reinhardt has grown increasingly withdrawn, his orders sharp and bitter, his confidence shattered. The soldiers speak of him in hushed tones, fearing that he, too, is beginning to crack under the strain. I do not blame him. How could anyone remain sane after what we've endured? The dead litter the fields, burned, torn apart, or worse, left as twisted, broken husks after encounters with Skaven machines we still do not fully understand. I see it now in the eyes of the men, the creeping realization that this is no longer a war we can win. There are whispers in the camp, rumors that Ikit Claw is not just another Skaven leader, but something far more dangerous. They speak of him as if he were a god among his kind, a being whose mastery over warpstone and science has allowed him to transcend the limits of mere mortals. I had once dismissed such talk as superstition, the ramblings of frightened men. But now I wonder. The dreams have started. They are vivid, grotesque things, full of smoke, fire, and the metallic screech of Ikit Claw's machines. Every night I find myself walking through a battlefield littered with the dead, Imperial soldiers and Skaven alike, but it is not the bodies that disturb me. It is the machines. They rise from the ground, towering over me, their gears grinding and warpfire crackling in their cores. I hear the laughter then, Skaven voices chittering, the sound distorted and mechanical. And always, at the center of it all, stands Ikit Claw, his red eyes glowing, his mechanical arm twitching with barely contained power. He says nothing, but I know what he wants. He wants the world to burn. I wake from these dreams in a cold sweat, the sound of warpfire still ringing in my ears. It has become harder to distinguish between what is real and what is a product of my fears. The line between invention and destruction, between madness and genius, is blurring, just as Ikit Claw has blurred the line between flesh and metal. Yesterday, Captain Reinhardt and I had a brief conversation. His once steadfast demeanor was gone, replaced by a haunted look that I had never seen before. He confessed to me that he no longer believed in the Empire's victory. "We're fighting a force we don't understand," he said, his voice hollow. "They aren't bound by our rules. They don't think like we do." I wanted to comfort him, to offer words of hope, but I had none. I could only nod in agreement. How could we fight against a mind like Ikit Claw's? A mind that saw no boundary between magic and science, between life and death. Every battle, the Skaven machines grew more violent, more erratic, as though Ikit Claw was pushing the very limits of what was possible. It was as if he delighted in creating chaos for its own sake, bending the natural laws to his will with each new invention. The camp is silent now, save for the murmurs of the soldiers huddled around their fires. The sky is overcast, the air thick with the smell of soot and burning flesh. The Skaven have not attacked for several days, but that only adds to the tension. We all know they are preparing for something. Ikit Claw is preparing for something. I fear that we are nearing the end. I have spent hours studying the battlefield maps, trying to understand how we can turn the tide. But the maps are useless. The Skaven tunnels shift and move beneath the ground, their war machines seem to come from nowhere, and their numbers are endless. We are fighting a tide that cannot be stemmed, a force that grows stronger with every moment of chaos. As I write this, I realize that my own thoughts are growing darker, more erratic. I have always prided myself on my ability to remain rational, to approach every situation with logic and reason. But logic and reason have no place here. Not when faced with the madness of Clan Skryre. Ikit Claw has taken what was once the realm of possibility and twisted it into something unrecognizable, something horrifying. I hear the scraping again. It is faint, distant, but it is there. Always there. Ikit Claw is coming, and with him he will bring the full force of his creations, his machines, his genius. I can no longer deny it. The Empire, for all its might and glory, is fragile in the face of this new reality. We fight with steel and powder, with tactics and formations. But Ikit Claw fights with the future. A future that terrifies me. Tonight I will sleep again, and I know I will dream. Ikit Claw will be there, standing at the center of the carnage, his eyes glowing in the darkness, his machines tearing apart the very fabric of the world. And I will wake, and I will write it all down, because that is all I can do now. Tomorrow, the final battle will come. I barely have the strength to write these words. My hand trembles as it moves across the page, and my mind struggles to comprehend the horrors I have witnessed. But I must record what has transpired, for history's sake, though I fear history itself may soon be erased by what I have seen. The final battle came as we all knew it would. The tension in the camp had been unbearable, the air thick with the smell of fear and resignation. Captain Reinhardt gave his final orders with a hollow voice, his eyes betraying the knowledge that this would be our last stand. The soldiers, battered and broken, stood in solemn ranks, their once shining armor now dull and caked in mud and blood. The cannons, those proud instruments of war, were silent, their barrels cracked and their crews demoralized. And then the Skaven came. They poured from the hills like a black tide, an endless swarm of chittering vermin, their red eyes glowing in the dim light of dawn. But this time they brought with them the full force of Clan Skryre's war machines, terrifying, unnatural creations that seemed to defy all logic and reason. Doom wheels thundered across the battlefield, their massive wheels sparking with warp energy. while warp lightning cannons crackled with lethal power, their barrels glowing green with the corrupting touch of warpstone. But the true horror lay at the center of their formation, Ikit Claw. He stood tall, his twisted mechanical body gleaming with malevolent energy, his every movement accompanied by the whir of gears and the hiss of escaping steam. In his clawed hand he held the storm daemon, the staff crackling with barely contained warp energy. It was a weapon unlike anything I had ever seen, its power radiating like a storm about to break. His eyes, those cursed red eyes, scanned the battlefield with cold precision, and for a moment I could swear he looked directly at me. I felt the weight of his gaze, as if he could see the fear in my very soul. The battle began with a deafening roar. The Imperial lines held for only moments before the Skaven's war machines unleashed their full fury. Rattling guns spat bullets at impossible speeds, cutting down soldiers like wheat before the scythe. Doom rockets screamed through the air, crashing into the ground with devastating explosions, sending men and earth alike flying in all directions. And then came the warp lightning cannons. Their beams of green energy arced across the battlefield, vaporizing entire companies in an instant. I watched in horror as an entire regiment of knights was reduced to nothing more than ash, their gleaming armor melted away in a flash of warp energy. The Empire's forces fought valiantly, but it was clear that this was no longer a battle. It was a slaughter. The Skaven's machines were unstoppable, their power too great, their numbers too overwhelming. The once proud cannons of the Empire fired sporadically, their shots going wide or simply being absorbed by the Skaven's mechanical monstrosities. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Ikit Claw acted. With a single deliberate motion, he raised the storm daemon high above his head. The air around him crackled with energy, the very sky darkening, as if the heavens themselves recoiled from the power he was about to unleash. The staff hummed with a deep, malevolent resonance, and I felt a tremor beneath my feet as the ground itself seemed to shift. And then, the blast. A bolt of pure warp energy exploded from the storm daemon, arcing high into the sky before crashing down into the heart of the Imperial lines. The ground erupted in a violent explosion of green light, and I was thrown from my feet, my ears ringing from the deafening roar. When I regained my senses, I looked out across the battlefield and saw only devastation. The Imperial army was gone. The men who had stood beside me only moments before had been reduced to nothing. No bodies, no remains, just a smoldering crater where they had once stood. The ground was scorched and twisted, as if reality itself had been torn apart by the blast. I could not comprehend the scale of the destruction. Ikit Claw had not just killed soldiers, he had annihilated them, erased them from existence with a single stroke. The power of the storm daemon was beyond anything I had imagined, and in that moment, I realized that the Empire's greatest strength, its armies, its war machines, was meaningless in the face of such destructive brilliance. I crawled to my feet, my body aching, my mind reeling. The battlefield was silent now, save for the distant chittering of the Skaven as they picked through the remains of our once mighty force. Ikit Claw stood at the center of it all, his red eyes glowing with a cold satisfaction. He had won. We had never stood a chance. Captain Reinhardt was gone, lost in the chaos. I do not know what became of him, but I can only assume he perished along with the rest of the army. The men who had once fought with such pride and honor were now nothing more than memories, their lives snuffed out by a single stroke of Ikit Claw's mad invention. As I stumbled away from the battlefield, my mind struggled to make sense of it all. How could one creature, one Skaven, wield such power? How could the Empire, with all its strength, be brought low by the twisted genius of Clan Skryre? I had seen war before, but this was something different. This was the future, a future shaped not by the strength of arms or the wisdom of men, but by the chaotic brilliance of machines and the corrupting touch of warpstone. I barely escaped with my life, and as I write this, I realize that I am one of the few who did. The Empire is broken, and the Skaven, they are rising. Ikit Claw, with his infernal machines, has shown us what lies ahead, a world consumed by madness, where the boundaries between science and magic are erased, where destruction is not only possible but inevitable. I fear for the Empire. I fear for the world. The future belongs to the Skaven, to Ikit Claw, to the storm that is coming. I can hear the chittering now, the sound of scraping claws on stone. They are close, and I know I cannot escape them for long. But perhaps this journal will survive, and in it, the truth of what I have seen. Perhaps in time someone will understand the madness that consumed us, and they will know what must be done to stop it. If there is still time. Magister Ludolf Ehrlich, final entry.